This is the MARS 400S Pro video transmission system. It's got a sender and receiver. It transmits up to 400 feet using HDMI or SDI, and personally I use this when recording and broadcasting a lot of different events every year. However, I've been reading online that some of you seem to be having trouble with getting blocky footage and not clear signals and all that kind of thing. So what I've done is a bit of research and come up with 8 different tips that can help you get the absolute most out of your MARS 400S Pro set. Let's get into them. The first of these things is the geography of the environment that you're working in. First of all, make sure that none of your cameras are too far away from the receivers. So make sure that your sending is not greater than the 400 feet or 120 meters. You can do this by either working in a small venue, but more importantly, positioning the receivers and the recording device sort of central to where all of your cameras are if you can. I know that's not always possible, but if it is, try and do the best you can. Here's a couple of examples. This is a boxing event, which is something I do quite regularly, and we've got the ring here in the center of the room, and I might set up 4 cameras here, 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 and here. Now there are a couple of different things I could do. Ideally, I would put the receivers and the video mixing gear right in the middle of the room on a table right against the ring side. This isn't an uncommon practice, but in some situations you can't do this. Another option is that I could put it at one end of the room. That was also not the absolute best because the distance between these 2 cameras is a lot greater than between these 2 cameras. So what I might do is put it on one of the long walls and just sort of end out a bit of space for myself there so that I can work cleanly and be as close as possible to all of the senders. Pretty simple and straightforward, but it is something to keep in mind when you're going into an event. Make sure that you pick out a space where you want to be to get the best job done for your client. The second tip is to do a channel scan. Now, what a channel scan does is the sender and receiver talk to each other and they test out all 8 channels available and tell you which ones are giving a clean signal and which ones aren't. The room and the environment, the people in it, electronics around the space, and even the building materials of the room can really make a difference here. So when you're choosing a channel to send a signal over, do a channel scan and you will see which ones are going to work well for you. To do a channel scan, you need to hold down the menu button on the receiver for a few seconds. Then when the menu pops up, channel scan is the first thing there, so you just select that, and what this does is it communicates and scans all the different channels available, and it will tell you which ones have got interference, in this case the 2, and which ones should be clear to use. That's just a really good way of making sure you avoid any interference. Tip number 3 is about spacing out the receivers. This is something I didn't do right for a while because frankly I hadn't read the manual, but I did go have a look at the recommendations and it says that you should place the receivers sort of about ½ meter apart. I've chosen to place them a bit further apart than that, and I've set this rig up here. As you can see, they're along this bar and evenly spaced, so there's plenty of space between them, and this has made a massive difference for me, and it will do for you as well. So keep your receivers well spaced and you'll get much less interference between them. Number 4 is elevating the senders and receivers. As you can see here, I've got the receivers on this crossbar that you've just seen, which by the way is just a normal backdrop stand you can pick up on AliExpress or on Amazon. They're really cheap. You can actually get them for about 40-50 bucks if you have a good look around, and you want to be able to lift this up to 1.5 or 2 meters off the ground. By doing that, you're going to make sure that there is clear line of sight between the receivers and the transmitters, and just sort of get everything up so that you're not going to get noise from crowds, tables, chairs and other things that people have around. Especially when people stand up, bodies can actually block a lot of wavelength signal, so by having it 2 meters up off the ground like I've got here, you're going to get a much cleaner signal across the room. Another thing that Hollyland do recommend, though it took me a while to find this on their site and in the documentation, is that when you set the different pairs up, so I've got 4 senders and receivers for example, when you set them up, make sure that they're 2 channels apart. So as you can see here, I've got this first pair on channel 1, my next pair is on channel 3, my next pair is on channel 5, and I do this so that there is a bigger wavelength between the different sets, a different frequency range between the sets, so that there's going to be less interference from one set to the next. And tip number 6, which Hollyland also recommend, is that you don't run more than 3 sets in a venue. I actually run 4 sets in a venue all the time and I don't have any trouble with it. They recommend 3, I find 4 is fine. This way you can also make sure that they do stay 2 channels apart. Tip number 7 is to try some different antennae with the sender and receiver. These are available from Hollyland. I'll put a link down in the description below so that you can go and have a look at those for yourself. These different antennae have different ways of working that can give more power to the signal or make the signal more directional. This way, if you have your camera and the receiver slightly further apart than you would really like, or you just can't put your receiver desk in the middle of the room or close enough to the different transmitters that you've got, then you can try this different antennae and you can get a little bit more range and a little bit more signal clarity out of it. It's not an expensive thing to do to get quite a lot more clarity and signal strength out of the devices. And that brings me to tip number 8, which is always have a backup plan. See, no matter how good your video transmission system is going to be, there's always a chance that there's going to be something really obnoxious in the room that's going to prevent a transmission signal from working. This could be really bad power in a place, it could be really heavy radio signals or audio transmission, there could be other people running devices in there that are just going to interfere with yours. It's always a good idea to make sure that you've got some other way of getting the signal from the camera to the editing desk just in case you need it. Not ideal, but it's always good to have that backup plan. Personally, I have a couple of HDMI over Ethernet sender receiver kits. These kind of devices can get you up to a few hundred meters range by running the HDMI signal over Ethernet and a couple of boosters. As I said, it's not perfect and it's not always easy to wire up, and it's just not ideal, but it's great to have that backup plan there in case you absolutely need it. Also, make sure that there's a way that you could possibly change your layout and get some of your cameras in close enough proximity to your editing desk so that you can actually just wire them up. If you come up with a backup plan and things aren't just working, your client's going to really thank you for making sure that you can actually get something in a really bad situation. A prime example of that, especially when you're doing things like the fight events or a large concert or a large social event, is that you can very quickly have hundreds if not thousands of people there with cell phones, and they all bring them out to capture that action right at the main moment that you really want it. Also, regardless of whether your event is live or pre-recorded for editing, make sure that you're recording on all of your cameras as well. I personally use the A10 Mini Extreme ISO from Blackmagic, which lets me do isolated recording on the signal that I receive from the MARS 400 Pro cameras, but I also always record on the cameras, so that if the signal gets messed up, I can always go and grab the footage from the camera. I just grab the SD card or the disc or whatever it is that we're recording to on that particular thing, and I can substitute that back in an edit later. This is even if you're doing a live stream, because then you can pull down the live stream and put up a new version afterwards with much cleaner footage. Once again, your client and the viewers are going to thank you for that. It's all about having that backup plan and just being prepared for the worst to happen. So I hope this has been useful. Don't forget to click here and subscribe. If you've got any questions, put them in the comment section down below. I will get back to as many of them as I can, and go and watch this video and this video, because they're also going to be useful to you, because hey, we're all keen on the same stuff. I'll see you in another video later.